Hello and welcome to the NatWest International Trade Festival. My name is Søren Nikolajsen. I'm the CEO of NatWest Markets in Asia Pacific. Businesses across the world have been operating in a new economic landscape defined by uncertainty and volatility as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. British companies have to factor in additional challenges arising from Brexit. International trade is one of the key ways forward for growth and recovery of the British economy. There are significant opportunities, and new trade agreements between the UK and other countries will help underpin these. To discuss these issues, I'm delighted to be joined by Natalie Black, Her Majesty's Trade Commissioner to Asia Pacific, and by Simon Penny, Her Majesty's Trade Commissioner to the Middle East, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. They will give us some insight to international trade opportunities as they see it for their respective regions, and also an update on the ongoing work on free trade agreements. Natalie, Simon, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. Let's start with the big picture. The economy has been hit by the impact from the pandemic, and the date for Britain's exit from the EU is drawing closer. How, in your view, can international trade help British companies recover more broadly and specifically from trade with your respective regions? Natalie, if we start with you, please.
Well, hello, Søren. And firstly, can I start by saying thank you so much for inviting us to participate in what is a really fantastic event. I know how much work has gone into this behind the scenes, and it's a great pleasure to be able to do a bit of a double act with my wonderful colleague, Simon Penny. So thank you for bringing us together, and I'm looking forward to a really engaging conversation. Of course, we come together at a particularly difficult time, and my thoughts do go out to everyone all around the world in terms of your clients, but of course, particularly colleagues back in the UK. I'm speaking to you from Singapore at the moment, and I'm delighted that Søren is based with us out here leading on Asia Pacific, and it's a wonderful collaboration that we have with NatWest. Of course, we're all looking at the same numbers in terms of the economic impact of COVID-19, not only here in Asia Pacific, but across the world. And I'm sure you'll all remember the numbers that were coming out in June from the IMF and how they were particularly concerning. Of course, those have been revised slightly. We're now looking at an on average fall of 5% in global impacts. But I think we all take those with a pinch of salt, and we will have to see how the next few months and indeed years go. But I think one thing has shown us during COVID-19 is the importance of international trade, and that's why it's so crucial that we've come together for this kind of discussion. Particularly in our role as trade commissioners, both Simon and I have the opportunity to try and support everything that business is trying to do through global trade at the moment, and in particular, keeping supply chains flowing. That's absolutely been the number one priority during COVID-19, whether that's through specialist medical equipment all the way through to traditional goods and services. And resilient supply chains, I think, is now it's a board level issue. It's probably the number one level issue that CEOs across Asia Pacific talk to me about. There's a lot that we can learn from each other. And of course, the dynamics in this part of the world are changing quite significantly, whether that's the relationship with China, whether that's the impact of the environmental agenda in this part of the world. So I'm very much looking forward to discussing all of those issues as part of this event today. But perhaps I'll hand over to Simon now, and he could give some thoughts from a Middle East perspective.
Thank you very much, Natalie, and thank you, Søren, and greetings from Dubai, where I am based. And I'm delighted to be able to support NatWest today on as part of this trade week. I have to confess that as an alumni and an ex-employee of what was the Royal Bank of Scotland, I'm delighted to be able to support them. Just by way of background, I've spent my career in banking, approximately the last 12 years of which have been based here in the Middle East. So it's a region that I know reasonably well, albeit from a private sector perspective. perspective. But I'm delighted to have taken on the role of the Majesty's Trade Commissioner for this region, and hopefully can encourage those of your clients that are not yet exporting to this part of the world to look at it as a very serious proposition. And also we're here to support clients of yours that are doing business here today. But just to put the region into perspective, by far and away our largest trading bloc in the Middle East is what we call the Gulf Cooperation Council, or the GCC, which is made up of the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, and Bahrain. And just to put some numbers around the scale of our trading relationship, last year our total trade relationship was worth £44 billion, of which £30 billion was the export of UK goods and services, which grew at a very impressive 10%. And just to put this further into context, outside of the European Union, the Gulf is the UK's third largest export market globally, behind only the US and China. In fact, we export more to the Gulf, 4 times more to the Gulf than we do to India, for example. So it's a really important export market historically for us, and will continue to be so. Within the Gulf, the 2 largest export markets are the UAE and Saudi Arabia. But I'm very clear in my own mind that we cannot be complacent over what I would describe as our historically strong export position. While exports grow consistently at anywhere between 6 and 8% per year from the year 2000, the GDP of the growth of the Gulf has grown about 4 times. So the pie has got 4 times bigger, and within that we've grown at 6 to 8%. The result of that is our market share has continued to decline from what was around sort of 7% to 3% today. But I remain very, very optimistic that as the pie keeps growing, UK companies will have a really important opportunity to develop. And within that, brand UK is really well respected. A recent survey highlighted that 40% of respondents that looked at brand perceptions showed that they would pay more for UK goods because they perceive them to be higher quality, more reliable, internationally respected, and just offering good value for money. And that actually translates through to a premium of about 10.5% premium for UK food products, and about 3.5% on average across all products. And this is a similar trend not only in the Middle East, but you see this in other emerging markets, and certainly you would be seeing it in the Asia Pacific region.
Thank you very much for that. And if we drill into this in a bit more detail, are there any particular trends or patterns in the demand for goods and services in your regions that you see leading to specific opportunities for British companies to tap into? Simon, start with you.
Yeah, let me just try and answer that in sort of broad terms, and then I'll give Natalie the opportunity to sort of dive in a little bit deeper into the Asia Pacific region. But I mean, clearly COVID has undoubtedly put the global economy into focus. It has highlighted weaknesses in the current order, as well as opportunities that we anticipate will be accelerated. I mean, Natalie touched on what we call supply chain resilience, and I have to say, Natalie mentioned it's a boardroom topic discussion now. It's also front and center of governments' minds around the world. As countries are starting to review their own supply chains, particularly for what they call nationally strategic sectors, such as healthcare and food supplies, we are seeing a trend for increased supplier diversification. Countries are starting to look to establish new relationships with suppliers globally, spreading the risk, and in certain cases starting to look to onshore some of the manufacturing to their own countries, as opposed to relying exclusively on imports. Services that require face-to-face contacts have been severely impacted, such as hospitality and retail. Sectors that can be performed remotely, such as IT, e-commerce, video conferencing, edtech, medtech, have thrived. In fact, technology has come to the fore during the pandemic, and this will only accelerate. I'll share more about this in a moment in the context of my region, the Middle East, as will Natalie around Asia Pacific. Suffice to say that we have seen an exponential increase in activity and interest into how technology can support just about every single sector. But let me hand over to Natalie, who can share some insights around Asia Pacific before I give some more insights on the Middle East.
Thanks very much, Simon. And you won't be surprised, I very much agree with you in terms of some of the trends that we're not just seeing globally in terms of a reaction to COVID-19, but more and more we're seeing locally in Asia Pacific. So many of these were existing already, and it's really a case of the demands of COVID speeding up the adoption. So the two areas I would focus on particularly are tech, but also the growth of the green economy and how important that is in this part of the world. I should say that when I talk about Asia Pacific, we define that for our purposes as Northeast Asia, so Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, Southeast Asia, so the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and Australia and New Zealand. And particularly when it comes to technology, we've seen a real escalation in the adoption and the opportunities. So this is a sub-region of 650 million people, young, vibrant, fast-growing middle class. And we are seeing a particular interest in both fintech, but also health tech, of course, part of the response to COVID-19. So by the end of this year, it's estimated that 70% of the Southeast Asian population will be online. They will be digital consumers. And that they are more than willing and able to make the most of that opportunity. So as a consequence, we've seen a real step up in the growth of the tech ecosystem because of that demand. We've seen substantial VC and PE investment headed into this part of the world, and particularly in fintech. So 3/4 of the population in Southeast Asia are underbanked. And as a consequence, that means there's the full range of opportunities when it comes to fintech capabilities. EdTech, of course, as Simon's mentioned, again, escalating because of COVID-19. But particularly in Southeast Asia, where around 175 million people are of the school-age population, you've got a huge captive market there who are absolutely interested and at pace want to make the most of the EdTech opportunities. So tech, to a degree, it almost goes without saying now, is a huge opportunity across Southeast Asia. But the other area we're seeing substantial interest is the green economy. Now, of course, pre-COVID-19, this was a hot topic as well, but I think the culmination of a global pandemic with the climate crisis has thankfully managed to keep this very much on the agenda. So even with everything else that governments are having to deal with, the green economy is getting more and more attention. In fact, just recently, both South Korea and Japan have joined the UK in committing to being carbon neutral by 2050. And of course, you would have seen the announcement from China with the commitment to 2060. And we hope that from a UK perspective, with us hosting COP26 next year in Glasgow, we'll see more and more countries stepping up to the plate on this crucial area of the economy. But particularly in terms of business opportunities, it means that you have governments setting out very ambitious targets, very ambitious demands, who are looking for partners. And so whether that's offshore wind in Taiwan or solar panel in Vietnam, we're almost at the point where we're seeing more demand than we have supply. And so getting in touch with our local teams on the ground is a great thing to do, particularly at the moment. We're seeing that the prioritization that's been put on that sector, on this sector, means that there are lots of opportunities on the ground to collaborate. And I'll come back to that a little bit more later. But let me hand back to you and you, Simon and Soren.
Thank you, Natalie. And let me just sort of dive a little bit deeper into this region. The history of the Gulf is really the economies are or have been underpinned by hydrocarbon wealth from oil and gas. And 20 to 30 years ago, I mean, the landscape of this region was very barren, with very, very little industry outside of hydrocarbons. But over the last 2 to 3 decades, Gulf countries have sought to significantly diversify their economies, investing the hydrocarbon wealth to create industries, in many cases, from scratch. I mean, you only have to visit Dubai, for example, to see the manifestation of this, creating a global logistics, financial services, and tourism hub. Similarly, visit Doha, visit Abu Dhabi, visit Manama, and you will see very, very similar examples of spectacular growth over an incredibly short period of time. Each country has today very, very clearly articulated what they call vision strategies. Anything Vision 2030, 40, 50. Some of them go out to Vision 2070. But all of these outline how each country is seeking to develop new sectors from scratch. Without being saddled with sunset industries like many countries in the West are, they have the ability to identify sectors of the future and invest heavily in those alongside more traditional yet critical sectors. And as I say, this transformation started about 30 years ago, but COVID has really sharpened the focus and accelerated it, and has compounded further in this region by the collapse in the oil price. I mean, consistently through all of my engagement with governments across this region, the same sectors keep recurring, and Natalie touched on them. The education and edtech within it is a really, really focused sector at the moment. So it's not just about tech though, but there's a lot of UK universities already established in the region. We have 13 in the UK alone. So there's a trend towards UK education being carried out in region. Secondly, healthcare, life sciences is a really, really important area. Not only because it's to support the domestic population, but we also see increasing investment from this part of the world in such sectors in the UK and beyond. So there's a desire that as they build up their sectors domestically to also invest in that value chain and that supply chain around the world. So we do a lot of work supporting Middle Eastern investors to try and identify and access investment into UK companies. Another area is financial services. I mentioned that the UAE in particular has set its stall out to creating financial services hubs. Dubai has its financial centre. Abu Dhabi has its global markets. Qatar also has its own offshore financial centre, as does Bahrain. So financial services is really important. And within that, particularly fintech, there's a bit of a race to the top at the moment as to who is going to be the regional fintech leader. And there's a lot of investment going into the government to attract fintech companies from the UK and elsewhere around the world. Another sector which I'll touch on is food. 90% of all food is imported to this region. So there's a heavy dependence on the importation of UK foods, and I touched on that value proposition of the UK, particularly around the perception of quality and the premium you can attach to food importation. But we're starting to see that sector mature as part of this supply chain resilience I touched on. And obviously being dependent 90% of your foods from abroad, it does put a lot of risk on your supply chain. So we're starting to see a lot of investment in the agri-tech space, particularly vertical farming, and starting to try and grow crops here in the desert, in indoor solar powered farms to produce vertical farmed food. I could go on. Natalie touched on things like advanced manufacturing technology, all sectors that are very, very much sharply focused as we speak.
Thank you. That's an encouraging list of opportunities with plenty of food for thought for executives of British companies. But let's turn to free trade agreements. In a post-Brexit world, they will have increased importance for access to international markets for British companies. The recently signed UK-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, I believe that's the full word, being the latest example. What can we expect next on this topic in order to provide additional tailwind for international trade growth? Natalie, let's start with you, please.
Thanks, Soren. And yes, very well remembered. That is the full title of the new agreement with Japan. So I think the best way to think about this is a full spectrum of tools that the UK is investing in to support jobs and the economy back at home. So this includes, for example, continuity agreements. So ensuring that we have the same trade access that we do under the EU with other partners. We've already signed our continuity agreement with South Korea, and we're currently in discussions with Vietnam and Singapore in this part of the world to finalise those agreements. We also have new agreements like the one with Japan, the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. And we have a whole range of even newer FTAs, which start with the US, which other colleagues could talk to as part of this event, as well as Australia and New Zealand. And those negotiations are very much live. But it's worth remembering that although we have these big overarching traditional negotiations, a lot of the work that Simon and I do is actually focused on day-to-day market access issues and really championing businesses in all of our respective markets to make sure that they're getting fast-acting support, particularly in the current economic situation. So to give you a couple of examples, in Thailand and in Indonesia, in my part of the world, we have joint trade reviews underway with the respective governments to really understand where the market access issues are on both sides of the table that are holding up business. But also it might be a case of one-off engagements to address specific particular issues. So I just encourage all of those clients that you work with through NatWest to feel free to get in touch if you think that there is something in particular that we can support you on through government-to-government discussions in any of our regions.
Simon, any thoughts from you on this particular topic?
As far as the Gulf's concerned, we've recently launched what we call a joint trade and investment review, which is a joint study to provide an overview of the trade and investment relationship between the GCC and the UK, to identify barriers to trade and investment and draw clear recommendations for future cooperation that both parties can take forward to deepen our bilateral relationship in the long term. The UK has previously completed joint trade and investment reviews with Brazil, with India, and they are ongoing as we speak with China, Indonesia, and Thailand. And the review with the GCC has 3 phases, covering the analysis to identify key sectors of interest between the GCC and the UK, to engage with UK businesses and policy research to identify key barriers to trade and investment, and lastly, to come up with a joint recommendation to address the issues to the joint trade review, which will improve the flow of trade both into and out of the UK into the Gulf region. We expect the review to be completed before June next year and result in an agreed and prioritised selection of issues for further collaboration. The review aims to determine whether the GCC can deliver on such recommendations, which is a really important factor for us in the UK when considering the GCC for a future free trade agreement, which we're already embarking on with other countries and regions around the world. A really important part of this process is engaging with businesses, engaging with companies, and engaging with trade bodies. And that process has already started. So our teams in the UK have already started that outreach to respective trade bodies to make sure that the review captures the views of the private sector in the UK to further improve and enhance their trading experience with the Gulf region.
Excellent. There's clearly a long list of things to do on both of your desks. In addition to free trade agreements, What else is the UK government doing to ensure British businesses are at the forefront of changes post-COVID-19 and post-Brexit?
Thank you, Soren. I have to say, as I mentioned earlier, I took on this role having spent a career in banking, and I have to say I'm genuinely amazed at the scale of support that is provided by the UK government to UK companies, both in breadth of support, but also the quality of support. And had I known what I now know, I certainly would have been far more engaged with DIT and its predecessors to help me when I was actually sort of doing business and supporting companies operating in this part of the world. And let me touch on three very, very significant strategies that the UK is currently working on to support the export environment. Firstly, the first one I want to touch on is what we call the export strategy. We have within the Department for International Trade a network of what we term international trade advisors, and they're spread out across the whole of the UK, and it is their role to engage directly with companies, helping them to understand what it takes to export and ensuring that they are what we call export ready. These ITAs are supported by sector experts and our overseas network, which myself and Natalie are representing today. We collectively have teams across 108 countries in the world, talking to prospective buyers every day, identifying opportunities and connecting UK companies to those. The export strategy aims to reduce, as we mentioned previously, barriers to trade, barriers to doing business. And let me share some stats with you which put into perspective the opportunity that exists for UK companies. DIT has done a lot of extensive research over the years, and one of the studies indicated that 20% of all UK registered businesses said that they have never exported previously, but do believe that they have goods or services which could potentially be exported or developed for export. This translates to approximately 400,000 UK firms that could export today but don't. And there are many reasons why that is the case. You know, some companies tell us that they don't have the capacity or the knowledge to export, and this is where trade advisors, as I touched on, can help your clients. Over 60% of businesses surveyed for whom exporting is possible report that a key block is an access to overseas contacts, customers, and networks with a strong barrier to exporting. And lastly, finance. Access to finance is commonly cited as a barrier, and the inability or lack of access to working capital is a really big issue for companies. Within the government, we have UK Export Finance, which is the government's export credit agency that works with many banks such as NatWest and exporters to ensure that companies are supported should they need insurance or cash flow assistance when they deal overseas. The second big strategy that is being worked on at the moment by the government is the industrial strategy. This is focused on addressing global trends which will shape the future, not only of the UK, but many countries around the globe. And we call them our grand challenges. Those are artificial intelligence and data, clean growth, future mobility, and an aging society. And governments around the world recognise the UK as a leader in these areas, and they genuinely want to engage with the UK, with the UK government, and with UK businesses to help them solve similar challenges in their own countries. And the last strategy I want to touch on is the investment strategy. This has a really, really clear aim, and that is to focus efforts on increasing and attracting investment from the world into all parts of the United Kingdom, strengthening the position of investment at the heart of the government's economic priorities and supporting innovation and job creation back in the UK. And just talking to my region, the Gulf has 7 of the world's top 15 sovereign wealth funds. We estimate that to date, Gulf investors have already invested over £125 billion in the UK, and there's a really clear appetite to do more, working with the UK government to support nationally critical projects. I touched on this a little bit earlier. There's a lot of that sovereign wealth interested at the moment in the work the UK is doing around supply chains and looking to invest in UK healthcare, UK life sciences, UK agri-tech. So there's a huge appetite for the world to invest into the UK, as well as UK companies looking to export. And I genuinely encourage all of your NatWest customers who have not yet exported, that they really should look at engaging not only with NatWest's trade advisors, but also the Department for International Trade and the trade commissioners, both Natalie and I, and our networks of team across the regions, who will be able to help you identify and connect with potential buyers of your goods and services.
Those are staggering numbers and a wide range of opportunities. That gives a lot of hope for the future. Thank you for that, Simon. And to finish off on a practical note, with all that Simon just said, can you tell us more about the support the trade commissioners and the chambers of commerce can provide to British companies planning to expand internationally? And perhaps a successful example of where that has happened from your respective regions. Let's start with Natalie on this.
Sure, Søren. Thank you very much. Well, firstly, I would go back to Simon's stats around the fact that 20% of businesses in the UK say that they want to export, but they're not really sure where to begin. And of course, a key role for trade commissioners and our teams across the region and working with colleagues back in the UK, and that is the whole of the UK, is to help these businesses navigate what can be quite an intimidating road, making sure that they have the right information and the right connections to make things happen. So particularly using chambers back in the UK, but also the chambers that we support here out in the region. That's a wonderful place to start because it provides networking opportunities, lots of people to talk to who have been through a similar journey, can show you the war wounds and the experiences. And of course, the ideal is that you learn from that and not have to experience it yourself. But other key partners, we've mentioned NatWest, of course, but also business organisations like the CBI, who are very active in this part of the world. So that first task for us, if you like, is to encourage businesses that maybe wouldn't have thought about exporting to date, to take that leap of faith with the support network that we can offer. But it is worth saying that another key element of the Trade Commissioner role is to encourage businesses who are already here, so British businesses that might be based in Singapore, for example, to look across the region and help them expand their operations. So Singapore is an incredible hub. We all know that. That's why I'm based here. Søren, that's why you're based here as well. But actually, the sizable markets that you have in Indonesia, in Vietnam, for example, take that extra leap of faith. So how can we leverage the regional model that we have through the trade commissioners to help smooth that path across what can be some quite complicated business and partnership arrangements? And that really leads me into the second area that we can help colleagues on, and that's around informing, helping to share as much information as possible on the market opportunities, making sure that you have access to the very best data, the very best relationships to help inform that partnership model, which particularly in Asia Pacific is absolutely crucial. It's a very difficult market to go it alone. Very few companies do. And so working with the chambers on the ground, working with the Department for International Trade on the ground, based in high commissions and embassies across the region, we can provide you with relevant information that helps you inform your strategy and helps you develop your strategy. And that's, of course, where the connections come in. Relationships are everything in Asia, as you well know, and I'm sure Simon would say the same in the Middle East. And so the absolute value add that we can offer is helping you to connect with the right partners, whether that's through something as formal as a joint venture, all the way through to the more informal engagements that often help get things done quickly in this part of the world. But that connection is quite often reliant on the right financing, of course, and the right insurance. And Simon's mentioned already UK export finance, but they are absolutely crucial to our relationships in this part of the world. And I've been very pleased to see them lead some pretty innovative new arrangements across Southeast Asia in particular. So whether that's the first Islamic financing of an infrastructure project through UK export finance that we saw in Indonesia at the end of last year, all the way through to them looking at new markets. And we're just hiring additional staff at the moment in Malaysia and in the Philippines to work alongside the Asia Development Bank. So we have a lot of ambition to raise our support in these areas, and I absolutely do recommend working alongside colleagues in UK export finance. So you asked me for an example of something that we've done in Asia Pacific recently. And I was going to talk about quite a substantial success that we closed the deal on about a month ago. But actually, I just opened my inbox before this discussion, and I had a wonderful email from a colleague based in Singapore who's head of infrastructure. And it was one of those emails that was titled Full Circle. And I opened it up and to see what it was. And he was just explaining how an introduction he had provided for a British company actually based in Australia to a company in Singapore had resulted in a new, very exciting deal, which I won't go into the detail of, coming off in a way that no one quite expected, but had come full circle from that initial introduction from a member of the team in the Department for International Trade. So yes, we support some very complicated and ambitious arrangements, whether that's financing of solar panels in Vietnam, all the way, of course, to the car manufacturing investment from Japan, which is absolutely crucial into the UK. But actually, it's the day-to-day interactions, particularly working with SMEs, that I think can be very satisfying and actually result in some pretty substantial outcomes that no one necessarily predicted. So these things come in full circle, and it's very exciting to see when they work.
Excellent. Thank you, Natalie. Simon, can you top that?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you know, the question was, what do we do? What is our role as trade commissioners? And it's the answer that Natalie gave is an identical one to one that I would have given. And it's really interesting to sort of hear Natalie talk about the Asia Pacific region, and particularly the role that Singapore plays in that as a hub. The Middle East is no different, actually. We have the UAE is pretty much the sort of the commercial hub of the region. In fact, we have 5,000 British companies to date operating in the UAE. And one of our biggest areas of focus is actually working with companies that are already here and encouraging them to do more business beyond into the broader Middle East region, but also beyond into Asia Pacific and increasingly into Africa. So we are seeing companies set up regional hubs here and fanning out. So that's an area which we're seeing a lot of growth for UK companies. Another area where we can support UK companies is through UK export finance. As a contractual obligation of borrowers here benefiting from UK export finance, they're obliged to procure a certain percentage of goods and services from the UK. So UK export finance puts on what they call share fairs, where they invite UK companies to come along and meet prospective buyers. The region also has a lot of trade fairs, some really, really significant trade fairs on a global scale. And a lot of UK companies do come out and exhibit their goods at such trade fairs. And one of the things we've been doing over the last year or two is putting in place what we call Meet the Buyer events. So we will invite buyers from the region, the broader region, into the UAE, and we facilitate bilateral one-on-one meetings between UK companies that are here and prospective buyers, not only from the UAE, but as I say, from the broader region. So, those are a few areas where I feel that we can provide further support. We also have a very active campaigns through the Great campaign, and you can see over my shoulder here, trade is great. It's a really, really active and highly recognised campaign across the world, and we have some really active social media channels through LinkedIn, through Twitter, as well as through DIT itself. So I would genuinely encourage your customers who are looking to export or already are exporting to subscribe to our social media channels, because you'll get a lot of direct proprietary information on what is happening in our respective regions. And then lastly, you asked me about successes, and let me just touch on market access. We touched on it a little bit through the Joint Trading and Investment Review, and Natalie talked about it in terms of the continuity agreements and future free trade agreements. But we do a lot of work here in the Middle East on food standards, for example. The regulatory environment can be a bit of a minefield, and it can change at very short notice. So we've done a lot of work in recent years to help support UK exporters of lamb, for example, which were experiencing difficulties, and also trying to enhance the export of UK halal meats to this region, and working with certification bodies in the UK and engaging with the respective regulatory bodies here in the region to make sure that UK exports are compliant with domestic regulatory requirements. We also support UK education establishments in getting UK qualifications and exam certificates accepted here in the region. So there's a lot of work we do to lobby on behalf of UK companies, as well as support them directly on their export journey.
Thank you, Simon and Natalie. You've just given us a lot of hope and optimism that there is life in British business post-Brexit and the pandemic. So more practically now, how should British companies get in touch if they want to engage with your teams?
So for my region, the Middle East region, we have an email address, which is hmtc.mep@fcdo.gov.uk. And one thing I would just like to add, actually, we have two major global events happening in this region over the next couple of years, which provide really big opportunities for UK companies. The first is Expo 2020, which will now be held from October 2021 through to April 2022. And that will be followed up by the FIFA World Cup in Qatar in 2022, both of which offer really, really big opportunities for UK suppliers of goods and services.
If I add from the point of view of Asia Pacific, firstly, I'd follow Simon's excellent advice around keeping an eye on our social media channels, particularly LinkedIn. Please do add us and follow us, lots of information there. And to get in touch, please email us at dit.apac@fcdo.gov.uk. And that inbox is regularly monitored, and someone will come back to you as soon as possible. We've got a number of big events in this part of the world as well. Of course, we'll be working really closely with Simon on Expo. It's a very, very exciting event. But also before the end of the year here, we will have the ASEAN Business and Investment Summit. That will predominantly be virtual, but there'll be a lot of opportunities for businesses to participate. And then next year, we're very much looking forward to the Tokyo Olympics. So, of course, we have to see how all these events are going to play out over the coming months. But there are a lot of things to get involved in, so please do get in touch.
That's wonderful. Nothing like finishing off on a positive and optimistic tone, and some great sporting events to look forward to. Natalie, Simon, thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights on the very important topic of international trade. To all the viewers, thank you for watching. I hope this leads to a few extra phone calls to Natalie and Simon and their teams who are ready to help. Goodbye from Singapore.